Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about why you're not attracting the right teammates. Finding the right teammates isn't about checking boxes or broadcasting open roles. It's about creating the kind of opportunity people want to be a part of. So today, we're digging into what actually draws people to a project by looking at how we communicate it, which is often in subtle ways we don't even notice. We'll explore how aligning your message with your mission can shape the future of your team. Whether you're bringing on your first collaborator or growing a small team, you'll walk away ready to connect with new talent with more clarity, empathy, and intent. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Tim Wood. Tim, how's it going, bud? And man, it's so great to have you here today. I'm just so excited.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm doing very well today. It's about 3:15 in the afternoon, at least where I am. So it's good. I've had my lunch. I'm bright and awake.
Awesome. I love to hear it. And, folks, for those of you who don't know Tim, he is the founder and managing director of Right Finder Headhunting. And he's, done between that, he's also done some like freelance game writing, narrative design, he's copywriter. And I mean, I'm just a little curious, and I know it's going to relate to what we're talking about too, Tim, but like, what exactly is Right Finder Headhunting? Like, what do you get into in a little bit there?
So we're a headhunting agency that serves the games and entertainment industries. Our whole deal is helping the right people find the right jobs at the right studios. So a lot of what we do is that kind of what we consider old school headhunting. It's market research, it's understanding who the movers and shakers in the market are and connecting them to the studios that wish to work with them. We also do a lot of work to ensure that the recruitment process as a whole works well for people from that kind of ethical standpoint and that empathy standpoint. So it's ensuring that people always get feedback, that they know exactly what's expected of them throughout the process, and that processes aren't needlessly arduous, expecting them to do, 15 tests or crazy amounts of people hours interviewing, just so that they've got a bit more equity, advocation, and advisement throughout the process from us. So we kind of like to be job concierges, I guess, is the way to put it.
Yeah. Wow. And it's kind of funny because when you're describing that, I'm like, it's not so much different than what we typically talk about here on the show, or even some of the work I do, like those same common themes and stuff like, you mentioned around empathy or finding that right fit, that right audience, right? For like, that's so important. And it's, well, I think the point I'm making, folks, is these things we're talking about here on the show in general, it's really universal. And as Tim is providing as a perfect example of how else it could be applied in other areas of business that are especially important to the games industry, right?
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit more about that too. But I'm curious. I imagine with that, we shared prior to, but we won't go into detail or anything. I mean, you're involved in a lot of other communities and such, and as well too, and just really involved and being busy and doing a lot. So when you aren't as busy, what do you do in your free time to, let's say, unplug a little bit?
Yeah. So when I'm not doing games industry stuff and when I'm not playing video games, because that does take up quite a bit of my time as well, I'm quite into my medieval era of history. And I suppose anyone who already knows me or is connected to me knows my LinkedIn photos, me in some kind of not quite authentic medieval armor. I'm part of a medieval entertainment stunt group called the Knights of Royal England. We do kind of jousting shows, sword fights, that kind of thing around different castles in the country. I'm quite into my field archery and fletching, so making my own arrows, shooting them at 3D kind of plastic targets, that kind of thing. And I've been a fencer since I was 8 or 9 years old. So using different kinds of swords and poking equally passionate people with them in a sports setting, I might add. And I like to write fiction. So I've done a little bit of game writing. I work on my own stuff that's not out in public yet, but I'm trying to get it out in public. And of course, like most people in games, I'm quite into my tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons or 40K's Wrath of Glory, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I love it. You know, we were thinking about getting my oldest son into fencing. He's not warmed up to the idea, but maybe like post show, you can give me some tips on how to maybe get him excited about it. And for archery, what kind of bow do you use?
So I shoot a Osage flat bow. So it's considered in the primitive class. It's made only using materials that you'd have found in the more primitive times of our history. And I shoot instinctively, which means I look at a target and I go, I reckon if I put my bow here and aim there, it might hit. Because I like the traditional feel of it, and I've got a very pretty bow that my girlfriend's parents sourced for me. It's got this
Oh,
lovely little bend at the bottom where it's been carved around the knot in the wood.
oh,
So
okay.
it's one of the most precious things I own. But yeah, certainly after the show, happy to give you some tips on fencing. I used to teach fencing. I'm really into it, as you know already from our previous conversations. So yeah, anything to convince people to the way of the blade, I'll help you out.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and that's really cool about the bow too. I have a recurve bow myself, and my whole philosophy was in a similar way, where it's like I want it to be as authentic as possible, but still within my means. So compound, as far as I was concerned, was out of the picture.
Yeah, I mean they're beautiful bits of kit. I mean, for me, it's just kind of it's more things to break or for me
Yes.
to get confused about. Whereas a stick and some string, I'm like, I can handle this.
Right? It's taking us back to our childhoods in a way. It's like you find this like curved stick. You're like, I can make a bow out of this. Love it.
That's literally what I used to do as well. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, appreciate you sharing that. But you know what? We want to get to know you a little bit more. And to do that, we're going to have you go through the Q box. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's Q box is just a round where we have a series of random questions prepared here today for Tim. So Tim, are you ready for the Q box round? Oh, I didn't even hear him. He's like, he just gave this really good signal to me, and he's like, I'm on.
Oh no, I said I'm ready. I might have cut out, but
Oh,
I
he
did
cut
a
out.
power stance as well, didn't I? So
The power cut out his mic. That's what happened. All right. All right. First one is, what's the most common mistake you see devs or studios make with their games?
okay, so first of all, I will preface this with I am not a game development expert. I can just about make a Twine game by myself. But some of the biggest disconnects I've seen as a consumer and as someone in the industry has been a lack of understanding or lack of engagement with the communities built around their games,
Hmm.
or a lack of focused and strategic marketing efforts to generate hyper interest in the game. I'm not going to name any names because that's not who I am, but there have been some releases this year which could have had a lot more attention on them, probably would have generated quite a lot of hype, especially given who those studios were and the stories of those studios and how they coalesced. But the marketing was rushed or the release was rushed, and as a result, the game fell on its face, for want of a better phrase. And then you've got very talented, good developers then paying the price in terms of layoffs or having to move on to other projects they didn't sign up for, etc. So I think for me, the devs need to understand that at the end of the day, you're making a digital product,
Hmm.
and it's the users who decide whether that product will live or die when it's released into the wider market. So, like, get to know your audience and learn kind of and anticipate what do they actually want from you and what would they be interested in, and understand them well enough so that you can still surprise them with new features, new ideas, and new directions, but you do it in a way that kind of respects their kind of stake in the process as the other part of the relationship of games making. I think that's kind of, for me, one of the most common mistakes is literally just that. How do you take it to market effectively, both in a development way, and also actually getting it, on proverbial shelves or Steam libraries or what have you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. All right, next is what advice would you give to someone else that's just starting out?
Yeah, so I think if you're starting out in making games, the number one rule is of course start. There's plenty of wonderful game engines out there that you can download for free. You've got Godot, you've got Unity, you've got Unreal, many others, Twine, Ink. Just start making stuff. Think of something simple that you want to play and start putting it together. You can look on YouTube, Reddit, Discord, the internet in general to find guides on how to do things. You can find communities of like-minded people, perhaps in a learning environment or a game jam setting where you can do some stuff together. But as a recruiter, what I would say is anything that you do, start documenting it now in your own game design documents. Write out the process of what you're doing now rather than in a retrospective, because what you're doing there is you're building up your bank of evidence that can eventually be used in a portfolio or that you can later refer to in an interview setting. It will be quite fresh in your mind what you're doing, but also it's good habits for when you're actually working in a production pipeline, because you are going to have to document what you're doing, the decisions you're making, or meeting outcomes and why you're doing it. So have that kind of internalized in your own kind of working process from day one. And I think you'll have a much easier time of it, especially if you're looking at a project you maybe did 4 years ago and you're having to do a type up of it 4 years later. You might not remember certain aspects of what you did. So writing it down now allows you to be more present, but also you're kind of building your portfolio from day one. And of course, you can pick and choose the best bits for your portfolio, but it's a helpful exercise to go through.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot too because oftentimes we don't think about it. Like if it's getting back to writing our resume or our CV, right? We're being very retrospective of these things,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's hard to be even with the lens. Like one of the things I tell people is like position yourself of how you're solving problems for whoever you're meeting, right? That's one way to do it, but I think you could, if you were to take that approach, you could be far more effective if you already have these processes outlined, and then you could like dig into other details and information you could share, like, hey, this is how I made things super efficient and here's how, and show examples, and people are like, yeah, let's do it. Or at least increases the I think those chances and opportunities. So I love that tip. That's such a good one.
Thank you.
All right, and last but not least, and the staple here on the show is what game are you playing now?
So I'm playing a rotation of games because it depends on A, how much time do I have, and B, how much infuriation can I take. So one game I'm playing a lot of at the moment is the demo of a game called Half Sword, which is a physics-based sword fighting game that's been designed along with kind of historical fencing in mind. And the developers have been consulting with historical European martial artists to make sure that it's as authentic as a game can be.
Nice.
And that's so far up my street, it's ridiculous. You control your right arm with the right mouse button, you control your left arm with the left mouse button, and as a historical fencer myself, I can actually put myself into authentic stances according to different treatises and sword fight as accurately as possible on the computer in this cool demo setting. So I can't wait for the full game. Currently, you can go through like a progression fight system, or just, you pick your armor set and your weapon set and go fight random people. And it's just really fun. It's proper captured the sort of the little fencing nerd in me, and I will be buying it when it comes out. So that's a really fun game, and that's just the demo, and I've been playing that to death.
Love it.
There's the classic of Helldivers 2. Absolutely love that game. It is just, I like being shot at a planet and then just having to do these crazy objectives whilst I'm getting eaten by bugs or chased by automatons or the Illuminate. It's a great game, and I play it with some friends, so it's that kind of classic Halo co-op type feel to me. Of course, shout out to Chivalry 2, very big medieval multiplayer fighting game. You might notice a little bit of a theme with some of my games here. I really enjoy that. I play that with some friends as well. And then I'm playing a bit of Warhammer 40k's Rogue Trader at the moment as well, for that RPG fix right now.
Nice. Well, really appreciate you sharing those, and wow, that was really cool to hear about. Half Sword demo too. Not in not just from what like shared, it's like, you know, quick digression for a moment, but there's times when I've talked about, even recently on LinkedIn, I shared a post about this concept of or a couple at least saying like, hey, when you can make a game for someone, like try to have that be the purpose. If you can make it, like make someone feel like this was made for them. And as you were saying that about Half Sword, I'm like, this sounds like it was made for you in a way. And it's just cool
It
when those
was.
moments happen.
Yeah, because like there's in if you're a historical fencer and you've fought in plate armor in a Buhurt setting, you'll know this. But like when you're fighting someone in full plate, only certain weapons are effective, and those
Mm.
are blunt weapons or a dagger to get in the articulation joints.
Yep.
And I couldn't beat this boss, and then I applied my real world fencing logic to the situation, and I killed it instantly. And I was like, damn, this developer is they've earned my
Yes.
5 stars. So yeah,
Oh,
check it out if you're into swords.
but I'm getting goosebumps now thinking of that. But it's those moments that I'm like that I like to talk about it because hey, it's hard to do. It's still a lot of work, but when it happens, it's freaking magic. All right, sorry, digression
Yeah,
over.
no, it's all good, all good.
All right, well, folks, now we're gonna get into the heart of the conversation here, and this is one I know I say this a lot for a lot of topics, but I am excited about this one for a particular reason. And like I said in the intro, it's why you're not attracting the right teammates. And, part of this idea, not just from, connecting with Tim previously and becoming familiar with the work that he does and everything, right? But a lot of this came from my own understanding and work in the industry where I've worked with lots of teams before. And man, how many of us have dealt with those situations where, oh, we hire someone that's not a right fit. We work with a contractor that isn't, or people flake. I mean, we hear it in the industry all the time. I have experienced it first time too with working with other teams. And I'm like, what else is there to do this? And which is why I'm excited about this title and why I can't think of a better person than Tim to talk about it. Why might we not be attracting those right people and stuff? So to kick things off, Tim, from your perspective, what makes someone want to join a creative team or a studio or whatever, especially when they have other options? And I know this day and age options are kind of limited, but what are the things that like are really drawing people and get them to at least apply to whether it's a job you have or just an opportunity to work on a small project?
Sure. And it's a really important question to ask yourself when you're advertising a role. For me, what it comes down to are the different components of interest. So that's creative interest, that's personal interest, and that's self-interest. So from a personal and self-interest perspective, people are going to be thinking through, is this job logistically viable for me? Because they're not just moving a proverbial 9 to 5, they're moving their entire ecosystem, especially if they're relocating towards you. So they're going to be looking at things like pay, progression, bonuses, benefits, all of those kind of little things that, make up that remuneration package. Am I going to be living off beans and rice for the rest of my life working here, or am I able to make some savings and perhaps go on a holiday or pay off some debt and that kind of thing? So people will look at kind of what you've got to offer them in return first in a lot of the case. And that's not because they're only money motivated. It's because, especially in this day and age, people need to know if they can actually afford to work for you, especially if they spent a year or two being unemployed because of layoffs or what have you. So I think that the biggest impact for them will be how will this affect me? How will this affect my family if they have one, or dependents, or even pets, that kind of thing. That's something that they're going to be thinking about. The other aspect of it is from a professional or creative perspective. If the role is creatively coded, are they excited and actually interested in what you're doing? Me, for example, if you were like, Tim, you can come write the plot for a medieval fantasy sword fighting game, I would be there with bells on. If you're like, Tim, we would like you to write the plot for this football game, I would really not want to do that, because my personal interest is not in that manner. So whenever you're kind of advertising to hire an artist or a programmer or whatever, like I think if you can include some information on what you're actually building, you're gonna start to pull in the interest from the right kind of people. you need to kind of look at what the job is comprised of as well. What problems and challenges are people going to be solving for you? What are those key deliverables in the first year, first 3 years looking like? Because there are people that are going to be thinking, well, I want to do these kinds of challenges in my next step, or my next part of my career, or to develop my own skills. You'll pull in interest that way. You kind of need to think about sort of how you talk about your own company as well. People are going to wonder about how your organization is structured. These days, people are going to be asking a lot of questions about runway. Can your company sustain itself for the next 2 to 3 years? If I leave my very good job that I've been at for 6 or 7 years to come join your job, that is a gamble these days, especially with probation periods and permanent employee rights and things like that. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And certainly one of the first questions I'm asked by candidates I talk to is, what's the company's runway? How is it funded? If it's a company that's got lots of investors who've got the control, that can sometimes scare people off now, because we've seen the effect of the layoffs for the last 3 years, what felt like 30 years. So I think if you can operate your recruitment and your recruitment focused advertising from the perspective of the reader or the job applicant, how can I cater to this person's self-interest and answer these questions before they ask them? Not only are you going to have a much more effective advert, but you're also going to kind of ingratiate yourself to that individual as well, because you're not obfuscating salary data, you're not obfuscating working location or how you're structured. You're being fully open and honest about who you are. And that's going to attract the people that are compatible with you, and will automatically start filtering out the people who aren't compatible with you. And that's kind of, it's your basic marketing at the end of the day, isn't it? Who will buy from you, who won't buy from you. And you want to really lean into that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sorry, I waffled a lot then.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's such great point stuff too. And one thing I want to call out to folks is, yes, there with the questions that we have today and how our discussion is going to go, a lot of the focus is kind of going to be from that perspective of, hey, if you're looking to hire and stuff. But for those of you who are like, oh, I don't see myself in any position to hire anybody, or at least to maybe some of these topics here, the one thing I'll ask you to do is, well, look at it from the opposite end. If you know what are the right things to ask for and stuff, and you even, briefly mentioned something too as well, Tim, is like, this could also, knowing these things better can also position yourself in a way where if you are looking for additional work yourself, even though you're doing, indie dev on the side and looking still for something a little bit more sustainable or in line with you, if these are all great points that you can lead in with to interviews where people are going to be like, wow, how do they know more about this stuff than I do? And maybe that could be, who knows? Ultimately what I'm saying is, this information is no different than what we've shared here on the show too, about knowing your audience. And in this case, if you're applying for a job, your audience is the people that you're applying the job for. How do you pitch yourself? How do you properly market yourself, present yourself to them? And if you know certain things that put you in a better position, then all the better. So I just wanted to frame that too, because I don't want to think this is just a one way to look at this conversation. There's lots of ways we can approach it that anybody listening can really benefit from this. So, all right. With that said, you brought up some really cool points. Like everything from that creative perspective, the self and personal, like all makes sense, especially on the creative side, because there's a lot of motivations behind it too. Great. Money is one thing, but I want something to motivate me to do the job better. And, people hiring want someone who's motivated too. I mean, it's just a better synergy. But when you're getting into, these opportunities, right? And making sure that they're clear intent, I'm curious too, for anybody who is like posting out there, what should studios think when presenting a role or opportunity? I know we dug into this a little bit more, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper, because one of the things you called out too is like problems. I even alluded to it earlier too. Is that something that's important to present, or what other things that we could put into these roles that can maybe provide a little bit more clarity behind them?
Yeah, so I think before you even think about posting an advert online, studios need to be sitting down with the hiring manager for the role, or the stakeholder, or whomever is taking charge, and actually run through what are the the definitive key skills and experience that we need to achieve these objectives. What is this individual going to be doing, and how are we going to measure that success? Because rather than pulling off a job description from the shelf or asking frickin' ChatGPT to spit one out for you, you can delve into what your specific organization needs from an individual. From there, you're going to have a much more accurate job advert because you can put in the specific detail of whom you're looking for. But also, if you're going down the headhunting or search route yourselves in terms of, approaching people directly, you've kind of got a hit list of what you're looking for. Say you've decided that you want to hire a technical artist working in Unreal Engine. Okay, what are the tasks that they will be helping with? Do you necessarily need a technical artist who's done Houdini as well, because that's just an in vogue skill set and quite niche? Or do you just need someone who can handle just the fundamentals of Unreal? Like, what do you need here? Because that will impact kind of how much budget you put aside for things. That's going to impact your overall talent pool and even the interview questions you'll be asking and how you assess this individual. So I think if you can really define what the realistic situation is for this job role, you're going to answer the candidate questions in a way that's going to be less soundbitey type answers and give them more of a real specific insight into what your ecosystem looks like for them. But you're going to have more accurate people as a result applying for your job adverts, especially if you can present those adverts in a correct manner, rather than going, we need someone who can work well on their own and in a team. You talk about those tech stacks, you talk about the key objectives that they'll be delivering on, those key tasks that they'll be doing, and people will self-select in or out depending on whether they can deliver or not. And you should notice that your view to apply ratios on your adverts close in as a result. So you might get less views overall, but you should get more engagements as more relevant people find your advert and are then able to apply for it. Because a lot of job advertising works on keyword matching or SEO. So if your advert's as accurate as possible to the specifics of what you're doing, it should, in theory, depending on the advert provider, come up to only people using those specific search terms and cutting out less of the not quite right for the role yet type individuals.
Nice. Another thing I'm curious too, and we did talk about it briefly, is like, signals that get people to stop and think, hey, I want to be a part of this. And I what you mentioned earlier, I think you kind of covered it, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Let's say from that indie perspective, let's say it's someone looking to work with a small team on a small project or something, or even medium sized, to someone who's looking for help on their small to medium sized project. So phrasing it as that way, maybe, bonuses, maybe like certain benefits aren't necessarily on the table. They can't provide those things. So if that's the case, what are those other signals that can really get people to stop and think, I want to be a part of this, if those things aren't available?
Yeah, so with signals that make people want to join, it will come down to things like survivability, quality of life, and general interest. So you might not have really high share options or really good, quarterly bonuses or anything like that. But, if you're paying a salary that is relatively commensurate with the market, you've always at least got a starting point of discussion. You could be in a situation where you're offering things like a lower salary, but some sweat equity or something like that. And that can still be an effective option. But what people will start to assess further is, how does this affect their quality of life? Are you the kind of studio or management structure that they could enjoy working for, or at least cope working for in these times where people are being less picky? Are they going to be satisfied working with you on this project? Do they believe in the project itself? If you're working on something truly game changing, pardon the pun, and it's a really exciting concept, people will be willing to take the risk, or some people will be willing to take the risk. I mean, if you could go back in a time machine and someone could say, hey, you're going to work on Knights of the Old Republic. No one knows if it's going to be a big success yet, but it's going to be a success and you could be on the founding team for it. So many people would bite off an arm to have that opportunity. So you got to think, are we are we in the process of bottling lightning? How can we assess that and present that to candidates who are going to buy into that journey? So I think it really will come down to the individual that you're talking to. But I think if you can lead with as much honesty as is commercially sensible. I mean, you don't want to give away your source code in the first interview or anything like that, but if you can at least be clear about the journey you're going on and the factors that indicate to you all that this is a success and a rocket ship worth jumping on, that's going to convert people over. I think if you're in a situation where you can't offer a salary or a bonus or anything like that at all, people might still come on that journey. It's just going to take a longer time. You might work on it part-time alongside other jobs and things like that. You need to assess your own situation and just work out a way that can still be attractive and appealing, but also logistically viable for the vast majority of people. Because certainly with me, certainly with many of the candidates I've worked with, the first thing you look at with a job is, can I keep a roof over my head and feed myself and my family whilst doing this? They're not thinking about how cool your project is yet. Answer those initial kind of security questions for people, then you can open up all of those discussions.
Nice. I loved how you went into that a little bit there and gave that example of Knights of the Old Republic, right? And that thing. And I kind of want to dive in a little bit deeper on that concept and idea, because, I see how we probably can see that common problem. I'm assuming here, but you tell us where people have a role and they're like, here you go. There's the details. Like you said, like an example is like, oh, we spit into Chat GPT and boom, here's the details and we'll post, right? Here we go. But like, how can teams kind of move beyond that way of, posting job descriptions and maybe speak more to, and again, this is what you were just getting into a moment ago, but speak more to purpose, impact, and even that bigger picture. Like, what are some other ways to go about doing that? Because I see that as a huge underutilized tactic or strategy that's still true to the team and is still going to be valuable to potential candidates.
Absolutely. And I think that the first thing to mention is that if you're a listener listening to this and you're not a writer or you're not a marketing writer or an advert writer, that's totally fine. An effective tactic that anybody can use is I call it kind of the pub or the barbecue scenario. So if someone comes up to me and goes, "Oh, Tim, what do you do?" What I say verbally to them to kind of get my message across and get them interested in what I'm doing or saying will often be very different to conventionally what would appear on a website. So if you're wanting to sell via the written form, is ask yourself the questions of, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Why should anyone give a damn? Have those in a Word document and use something like voice to text or something and verbally answer those questions. Imagine you're at a conference or a networking event and someone's going, "Oh, what game are you making?" And you're like, "Oh, we're working on an RPG where llamas have learned how to use machine guns." And you're like, "Okay. That's boiled down into a few sentences. I want to know more about that world, like they've got fingers now or big triggers that hooves can operate, you spark an imagination that way." But like when you remove that kind of that barrier of the blinking cursor on the Word document or a pen and paper, and you just allow your brain to kind of word vomit, you can get the rough message out there, and then you can work on refining it and distilling it. And you should always ask yourself with every single word or letter you put on the page, why will someone care about this? Or why will someone be interested in this? And honestly, if you can't answer that question with 100% certainty, cut it and just see what it looks like after. You might have a much shorter advert than everyone else's job adverts out there because they're just posting job descriptions online. Even if you've just got a paragraph, 2 paragraphs of, "We're building a game in Unreal. It's about llamas shooting machine guns. We need someone who can handle the technical processes behind making the animation rigging work in the gameplay. If you can use Unreal and this and that, please get in touch." That could be your advert. See how it goes. You're allowed to iterate, you're allowed to experiment, and you're allowed to fail. Of course, you might have runway and timelines to consider, but I think that the most effective thing for me is is going the kind of voice to text route. And if you can boil down your overall objective into its simplest elements and explain why you're working towards them and how that individual can get you to that point, they'll start having the context on your bigger picture, but also the context on what their life could look like joining you. And they'll start subconsciously thinking about working with you. They might look up at your website online and see your proverbial office if you've got an office and be like, oh, that might be my desk. And you
Yeah.
spark someone's curiosity and interest, and you start winning them over on an emotional level as well as the practical, and you're going to start coming out miles ahead of your competition who are trying to hire the same people as you in many cases.
Yeah, I really like where we're going with this conversation because honestly, if you think about it, a lot of these things that we're talking about here that you were just sharing with us, they consist a lot of like abstract ideas, which is sometimes, difficult to articulate or to think about and execute upon. So I'd love for us to go a little bit deeper because I think we're getting into areas where it gives us an opportunity to really establish good relationships with people or even just resonate with candidates a little bit more, and I think that's going to have an overall positive impact on these types of efforts. So I'm curious on in that vein, what would you say is a good way to, let's say, either reflect or convey your studio's personality and values when inviting someone to join, because I think that's something we don't necessarily think about either.
Absolutely, because I think one of the best ways you can do that, and it's throughout your process interacting with the individual, whether it's interview, the emails you send, and stuff like that, but let them meet you all on the level that you all interact with each other on daily, because that's
Mm,
going to give them a really good insight into kind of just the general atmosphere, the general kind of camaraderie and rapport that you've all built with each other, and they can kind of see that for what it is, rather than you all kind of putting on some kind of corporate mask for a formal interview process. Some tactics that studios and clients of mine have used to great effect are things like meet and greet calls before the interview process starts. So just kind of like hey, I'm the internal recruiter at such and such, and just wanted to thank you for taking your time in the process. This is a quick call just to go through like these are the interview stages. This is what we're going to be asking you to do. This is how we do feedback. Are there any
yeah.
things that I need to consider for you in this process? And do you have any questions before it goes down the more formal route? There are interview stages that can work quite well if you're hiring for an office role, which is, take the candidate for lunch, with some members of the team, or get them to visit the office and actually have a look at the project you're making. You might not be able to make build footage public online for whatever reason, or even share it digitally, but once an NDA is in place, if they're where you're working, and you can share that, go ahead. That's a great way to show kind of the overall, what is the culture for, what is the end product that we're aiming for here. If you're remote, you can still do that with things like screen shares. You can have just more general talking shop style interview conversations with them, and be willing to share as well. What was the initial seed that founded your studio? Like, what did you all coalesce around? Was it, were your founders fed up with how they're being managed elsewhere? Did they want to make something that's never been done before, such as llamas with machine guns, which is an example I will keep using? Tell them of your future plans. Tell them of the things that you've perhaps struggled to do. A really good one, if it's a really creatively focused team, is I like to ask teams which darlings they've killed that they still think about.
Mm,
What are the things that haven't made it into the game and why? Because that can tell you a lot about the overall creative decision making process, which is very important for many people. But I think if you can if you can meet them on that level that you interact with each other daily, and you can just be really as open as possible about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it, your personality and values are going to shine through far more effectively than those word bubbles you get on office walls that says like, we are creative, we are honest. You can literally exemplify that with every step of the process, right down to your email invites. Are you using a bog standard template response, or are you using something that a human being has written to, still appeal to the candidate? Because every single touch point you have with someone is marketing. and an opportunity to show them who you are. So just be tactical with it, but be chill as well. If that's your vibe,
Yeah.
if you're a really highly strung organization, you'll come across a different way. But
I like that approach too, because essentially what it encapsulates is just, hey, just, one way you can do this is to be authentic as possible. And in addition to that too, like you were even calling out to some things that like I thought was really interesting and cool where, you can also make it about them and make it about, so asking those certain questions, like, what do you enjoy? And I think in a lot of that too, it might, like, think about it this way, and maybe this is a bad analogy, but if you're going out to buy a car, right? And you have a guard up because you're like, up, typical car salesman, they're going to just try to get me into something I don't even want or whatever. But then if they approach you, and this has actually happened to me, and if they approach you, be like, hey, how's it going? Well, what are you looking for? That's cool. Oh, we have this over here. Just check it out. Like, it's like, wow, now my guard is down, if anything, meaning I'm going to be more open. I'm going to be more authentic. I probably maybe like match that sentiment a bit because I feel relaxed and comfortable. And I think in those moments too, that's probably where a lot more truth comes out. That's going to just be that much more helpful information you could use as someone who's hiring a contractor, someone to be like, is this person a really good fit or not? As opposed to them acting a particular way.
massively, that it's the real difference between consultative selling and just hard selling. I mean, when I bought my car, I drive a Kia Stonic, right? It's considered a mini SUV. It's not a flashy sports car. It was also the only car in the lot, as you'd say, over your side of the pond, where I could fit both my dog and all my swords and spears in. So, and I was like, yeah, sold. And the salesperson was like, yep, never had a request like that before, but glad you got a car.
Yeah.
So I think definitely just being that truly authentic self, even if it's a little bit chaotic or weird or what have you're going to attract the right people for that culture. The people that are going to add to it because they see things in a different perspective, but they want to come on that journey and they know what they're walking into, and they're not going to be surprised either. If you sign on the dotted line, you start on day one, and then suddenly it's like, haha, got you. We're actually totally different to how we were in the interview. You've just cultivated a flight risk, and you've wasted a whole bunch of money when you inevitably have to replace that person in 6 to 9 months' time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like those are always the things that and what I shared in the opening or in the beginning at least was part of the reason why I'm happy to have this conversation, because that's all too common, is to invest that time, energy, or even just now waste that opportunity cost because something didn't align. Someone bounced for X, Y, or Z reason. You know, it's a harsh reality that we always face with, and identifying even these little things that we're talking about that might not seem like a big deal or really focused on, hey, this is the job that actually needs to be done. Why are we talking about this little stuff? That's why, to prevent those types of things that usually will blindside us if we're not careful. And these are some, I would suspect, and what you're sharing with us today, Tim, is these are methods to potentially filter and avoid those types of moments from happening. I'm curious too, because we're going in another direction here, not like lots of rabbit holes almost, where we're thinking maybe a little bit more about making it about the candidate, right? And making it about, them, which again is probably just a different approach than what we typically might think about these situations. And that idea, that concept, like how could you say too that like founders or even, just solo devs better understand what their ideal teammate is actually looking for? Because again, I think that something like that, and knowing that, or at least trying to explore that, is going to still put you in that position for sustainability from a team perspective, or getting that right fit, so you don't have those problems that we just called out to.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, the one of the best ways is the interview process itself. I mean, your subject is right in front of you, and it really comes down to the skill of the interviewer. So what I like to do when I'm interviewing people, of course, is a little bit of an icebreaker, kind of how's your week, how's your day, that kind of thing. Get people comfortable in the setting. go through a little bit about what the interview will entail, and then I just like to understand kind of their story of how they've got to me that day. So, it's tell me a little bit about your current role and background. What are you doing? What has led you to applying for this role with us today? Yes, we're super cool, but there's got to be some motivation there for you into why you'd like to work with us. And you can kind of talk about the moves they've made. You can understand maybe why they've left certain organizations. Are they changing jobs for bigger projects? Are they looking at different locations, different salaries? Have they just been very unfortunate because their studio's shut down, or it's been completely axed to the bone, which is a very valid reason to move on. But one thing that I have seen, sadly, an increase in is, oh, we're looking for people with more stable job experience, even if they've been at studios that have been laid off. So I think that understanding their journey is a great indication of kind of the parameters they're operating in to find a role and why they need you. If it's someone that has consistently moved roles for bigger and better projects or more challenging projects, that tells you a lot about their inner desire. If it's someone who has been laid off, for example, and maybe they've been laid off a few times, perhaps they're looking to you as a studio that can exemplify that stability and a project that is viable enough and interesting enough for them to be like, finally, I have somewhere to practice my craft and finish it. I think that's really important. Little things like interview questions such as, what excites you the most about this opportunity? What are the elements you really want to know more about once we've got an NDA in place or once you're on board? One I ask, I'm giving away one of my little secrets here, is I always ask people, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your current or last role? What's that one element that you would tweak? Would it be a longer lunch break? Would it be less daily stand-ups? Or would it be, more funding for better tools and technologies? Because that will give you some really interesting flavors as to what people value and what they're searching for. One thing to always remember when you're weighing up these answers and you're speaking to these people is that as a founder, your business is likely one of the most important things in your life. That's certainly true for me. So if someone's coming in as an employee and they're being contracted for 35 to 40 hours a week in return for money, they may well just see it as a job that they do perfectly well, smash it out the park, but they switch off at the end of each and every day and weekends are their own. That's still fine. If it's their life and it becomes their favorite job and, they're pulling out all the additional stops for you beyond, exceeding all their daily duties, that's great as well. But I've seen a lot of founders fall into a trap where they need people to be just as willing to die on the hill that they're willing to die on when it comes to hiring. And I think, yes, look at understanding people's motivations and desires for working for you, but don't penalize them because they're not willing to, die on that hill for the business like you are. Look at the overall context of what they're doing, the job objective they're willing to complete. And if that falls into your business plan and that's going to, help the product get made and help make everything work the way it needs to, then that's good enough. They don't need to get a tattoo of your company logo in the process. And I think things have shifted a bit too far in the other direction where people are expecting kind of do or die corporate loyalty. And it needs to be more balanced because at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings. So... Right. Yeah, understand what people want, but also understand they're still people. They're still abstract and esoteric, and their lives are just as complex as yours.
So important. And what you just said too, it's just as a matter of understanding their expectations and everything else, and making sure that you can properly set your expectations too to what those are. And I mean, you it's not like we're a means of you were required to change. It's more of now that you know of these expectations, what yours are, but now you can properly align them in a way so you're not like that. You said that problem you're seeing is where people are like, oh, I really wish. And it's funny, I've been in that boat too sometimes where you are so passionate about your company, your job, what you're doing. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, I wish someone else. And anytime I've gotten in those moments, I'm like, okay, dude, but think about it. This is your inner perspective. It's not realistic or applicable to what you're thinking about here and how that person should be, doing their job or whatever. But it's those types of conversations that are important to have or to think about, as you said, because it totally is a problem, and if it left unchecked, it just creates more problems.
Exactly. I think just having context and a sensible understanding of things can do so much for founders. I mean, in my own business, there have been times where I've had to deal with things very late at night or very early in the morning. And the times I've had employees, they might have, they might have checked their emails at 8 at night because they saw the notification come up and they've gone, "Oh, Tim, this has happened. What should I do?" And I'm like, "You do nothing. This is your time. I'll deal with this because I own the gaff, along with my business partners. So it's our responsibility to kind of do that extra bit of load should we want to." So I think, yeah, context is always key with these things.
Awesome. I know we talked a lot about like different, even like kind of deep dive like strategies or tactics we can use to really find that right person, right? But just I figure it's worth going over real quick. Like, what are even some common mistakes that cause the wrong people to apply and or the right ones to walk away? Because these are both things that we want to avoid, and that's just as important to know as everything else that we talked about.
So I think with adverts in particular, it's being overly broad in your requirements. If you look at a lot of job adverts, what they actually are sneaky little job descriptions. And a job description is kind of like the ingredients on the packet of crisps, and the advert is the front, which is, lots of delicious looking crisps or chips, as we'd say in the lovely United States of America. So, a job description is a tool for benchmarking, skills, responsibilities to quite an exhaustive degree for HR context. It's so you can define kind of what does this role do? How can we assess this role against salary spine point structures for kind of pay reviews or disciplinaries in some cases if someone's not doing all of their duties for whatever reason, or it's used for performance reviews, development plans, that kind of stuff. So what you end up with is a document that lists pretty much absolutely everything that person could ever possibly ever do in your organization for that role. And it reads like a list of demands. What that does is it obfuscates what you actually need from that role in terms of a attraction perspective for the right candidates. So you'll get a lot of people that you would consider inappropriate for the job looking at it going, "Oh, well, I can work in a team. I can explain technical things to non-technical people. I can do this, and I have some understanding of video games. I might not have Unreal experience or Unity experience, but I do have everything else on the desired list, so I might as well punt an application in." And then they go into an applicant tracking system. The recruiter looks at them and goes, "Why has this person applied for this job? They're not a fit." And sometimes they'll get a rejection, not all the time. So I think that can, in covering every single base you have, you just open up multiple entry points for people that will not get the job. Where that causes the right people to walk away is that it gets hard to glean through multiple job descriptions, especially if you're open to work, you're applying for maybe hundreds of jobs a day. You're going to go to the ones that are clear and succinct in what they're asking for, because you can actually understand what the job is, what you're going for. If you're kind of burying things in soft skills as well, like the working in a team or alone example, you've basically just described pretty much every human being on the planet. So if that's the leading thing on your job advert, that's what most people are going to weigh themselves against, because candidates will not read a really long job description to the very bottom when they're applying for roles. You get it in one or two cases, but with things like quick apply, instant apply, or I'm sure some people are using bots or AI to speed up their processes. You end up with adverts that no one's really reading, with applications that haven't really put too much work into it, and you just end up with hundreds of applications in some cases, and then maybe one person gets an interview or two people get an interview. And it's kind of, when you think about the people hours you sink into the assessment side of that advert, you're wasting money that way. I think if you can have something that is specific and targeted and speaking to the ideal person you want to hire, you write the advert for that one person, have some kick out questions in there as well. So do you have proven experience in this? Do you understand how to use, I know, Unreal 5.3, etc.? And then the people that select no to those questions get the rejection mailer. You can start targeting it a bit more. I think as well, another thing that can happen, there are sometimes reasons why you might not list a salary straight away. Maybe you're waiting for funding, or maybe there's some kind of embargo in effect. But, obfuscating the working setup and the salary ranges can really put people off applying for you as well, because they're having to play detective on Glassdoor and talking to contacts they may have at your organization as why they should work for you. And, quite rightly, we're seeing legislation now coming in many parts of the world, and particularly America, where you have to have a salary on a job advert. Because if I know that I can't afford to live working at a specific job, why would I apply for it?
Exactly.
I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting your time. So I think if you can just be as open as possible with all the information that you can be, you are going to get more accurate applications as a result, particularly if you can add in those kind of kick out questions or work with recruiters, internal recruiters, to just kind of make your strategy as optimized as possible. What we must remember in any kind of job advert scenario is job seekers do not want to be job seeking. They are sick of it. It's stressful, it's time consuming, it's often done at a point of not just necessity, but kind of an all-time low for many people in their career. They might have been laid off, they might have just had enough or quit in a blaze of glory or whatever. So you need to be thinking of the kind of the emotional mindset these individuals are in when they're applying for a job. Like, stop putting artificial hurdles in the way, because every time you kind of hold back a piece of information for, we'll reveal that in the offer stage, not the beginning stage, I always ask why. What is the actual commercial reason we're doing that? And if there's a valid reason, fine. But if not, the whole point is it's about talent attraction. You got to put some honey in the honey pot to actually get the bees. or the wasps. I can't remember which one it is, but that's kind of the concept you should have. So it comes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, who should care about this and why should they care about this? And it's also looking at the overall, that person's self-interest and drawing them in. So if you can get that right and target the specific people you actually want to hire, you're going to have a much nicer time with your recruitment. You're not going to be dealing with, thousands of people per role, and you're thinking, oh God, we've had to close the advert after a day. We've got one interview out of it and a very stressed CV reviewer on top of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's time, money, resources, bandwidth, energy. It's all these things that you're losing if you really don't tailor those things and asking those core questions. So absolutely love it. I know we're coming on time here, but before we close, I mean, we talked quite a bit, lots of different things. Based off our conversation, though, what would you say are some tips or suggestions you'd recommend to people listening today?
Yeah, so if you're a studio or you're a game developer and you're thinking at some point you're going to need to expand, start assessing the skills and capacity gaps in your team right now, and start thinking of the roles that you will need now or in the future, and start writing the job descriptions for them. What will we possibly need in 9 months' time? We're doing our vertical slice, but at some point we're going to need 2 more level artists or what have you. Start doing the work in now to prepare for that recruitment cycle, because I promise you it'll pay dividends, because when you are ready to hire, you can just get going straight away. So that would be my first tip. My second tip would be to sit down with your counterparts or your colleagues in your studio, or with yourself if it's just you right now, and think about how you would actually assess and interview new hires. Define what your recruitment process would look like, and come up with a rough plan of action, so that if someone does leave suddenly or is unable to work, or you do need to expand because that funding just hit and now it's go time, You've got a plan of action that's not being made in a rush, and that can kind of cover more of the basis than it would if you're like, right, we need to hire by Monday, it's Friday, let's just punt an advert out. Have some strategy and lay the field of battle before you fight it. I think that's really important. If you've already got a recruitment process in place, go through it with a tooth comb. Look for every point which will be a pain in the neck for candidates and try and eliminate it or change it to make it better for them, because that will make it better for you. My last thought would be to kind of using that voice to text exercise, perhaps, or another method if you're happy with that, is to write down or come up with the points why someone would actually want to work at your studio on your game. Right from the perspective of a reader's self-interest, and lead with the things that would be meaningful for them. So, it's kind of thinking about, this is what this job role is and the impact is, and you're leading with that kind of thing rather than going, oh, we were founded in 2010 and we're all best friends and we like working in tech. That the goal for this is to start practicing your initial pitch to new hires, so that you just don't feel wooden when you're having those initial conversations, or if you happen to just bump into your ideal hire at a community event or a video game event, you think, oh, frick, we need to hire this person, and you can kind of rattle it off rather than stumbling over your own words. So I think it's a lot of prep time are my tips, really. If you think, be like Batman with your recruitment, you'll be in a good place.
I absolutely love it. Such great things here. And, again, you said, I mean, this might not be for everybody, or it might be a process to kind of learn, for anybody interested in maybe, getting some more clarity about this or talking more. I know as part of your business, I mean, you're open to some kind of offer, like a free consultation or something, correct?
Yeah, so if you're listening to this today and you think that you could do with just a little bit of a soft guide on what direction you're going, or you want to just bounce some of these points around on a call, happy to spend, about an hour with you just to go through that initially. If you just drop me an email and reference the podcast, we can get that set up. What I will say is I will need to balance that alongside my capacity, but I will try and get to everyone that comes to me.
Awesome. Well, can't thank you enough, Tim, for this. And, if people need to reach out, connect, or just learn more about your company, what are some links? What are some ways that people can do that?
Yeah, so the main link for our website is www.writefinder.com, and that's Writefinder spelt with a W as in writer. You can also find me at tim@writefinder.com, or if you go to LinkedIn and type in Tim Wood Writefinder Headhunting and look for the person dressed as a knight in the profile picture, that's me. If you're someone that types in hyperlinks, it's just linkedin.com/in/Timwood4134. And you can connect with me there. I'm also on Blue Sky. You just type in timwoodheadhunter.bsky.social, and you can find me on there. That's more just my musings and more esoteric stuff. But, if you're into that, you're more than welcome.
Awesome. Well, again, those links will all be in the show notes too, folks. And Tim, it has been great and super insightful. I can't thank you enough for sharing everything that you did today. I think it's going to help out a lot of people.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. And thanks for having me on.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.